Hello, it's your friend, the New Wave Sage, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I thought a good way to get started and for us to get to know each other was for me to tell you my top 10 favorite New Wave albums of all time. At number 10, I'll pick Joe Jackson's Look Sharp. I love this album. This came out in 1979. I was 16 and I had a part-time job at a machine shop. So I had a little bit of money to start buying some records, and this was one of the first albums I bought. When I was working at that machine shop, Is She Really Going Out With Him? It started to get into regular rotation on our local rock station. And several of the guys that I work with, when that song would come on, would stop what they were doing and say, "Look over there, where?" and join in to the whole song. It's an incredible album. This is what New Wave in the UK was starting to mean at the end of the 70s. Songs that were a little more accessible, a little more danceable, where there was more fashion involved, a little more poppy than what was going on in the punk scene. For my next pick at number 9, I'm taking Devo's question, "Are we not men?" Answer, "We are Devo." I have a super clear memory of seeing Devo for the first time on Saturday Night Live in October of 78 when they did the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction. And I remember just being blown away and confused and mesmerized by this performance. I actually turned to one of my older sisters and said, "Is this like a joke or something?" Not only is this one of my favorite New Wave albums of all time, but it's one of my favorite albums, period. It made me a lifelong Devo fan. I've seen them a bunch of times live and really got me into New Wave altogether. I started really from them. They were kind of a gateway drug into other bands. I just re-listened to this album not too long ago, and it's wild how modern and fresh this album still sounds. And isn't it time that we all just admitted that Devo was right about everything? For my next pick, I'm taking the Cars' debut album. On my TikTok account where I talk about New Wave, people pretty routinely come on there to argue that the Cars weren't really New Wave. And it's always safe to ignore these people because they have no idea what they're talking about. This album is incredibly nostalgic for me because it hit my high school in California like an earthquake. Before that, everyone was really into Led Zeppelin and classic rock. And then this album came out and suddenly everybody was listening to the Cars in the parking lot. This album in a lot of ways is like a Cars greatest hits album. I can't tell you how many times I listened to this album in high school. Still sounds great. Great production values by Roy Thomas Baker. Early adoption of synthesizers, early adoption of music videos later by the Cars, and really just an incredible sound. I took the Cars' journey all the way from this album till the end, and I'm much the better for it. At number 7, and you can tell I'm kind of going chronologically here, my pick is Duran Duran's debut album. In the fall of 1981, I was a DJ at college radio station KSU, the Underground Sound. And I have such a clear memory of a group of tween girls calling me up and saying, "Play some Duran Duran." And I said, "Some what now?" And they said, "Duran Duran, they're New Romantics." And I said, What are they?" And they said, New Wave, New Wave." And so I went and got the album and I played Planet Earth off of that. And again, like several of these albums, this was a debut album that made me a lifelong fan. I think most people would tell you that Rio is their best album, but this is my favorite, this debut album. I love the sort of space pirate vibe they have going on in this album. Heavy use of synths. They're really influenced by Japan and Roxy Music and a lot of the other bands. Planet Earth, Girls on Film, Night Boat, Careless Memories. I mean, it's just like one incredible package for me. Great album. For my 6th pick, I'm taking Adam and the Ants, Kings of the Wild Frontier. There are certain albums I think that you can remember where you were the first time you heard them. Certain bands too, I think. And this is one of them. I remember a friend of mine playing this album and just walking over directly to the turntable, picking up the album and looking at it and saying, is this guy like a Native American? Is he Romani? Is he a pirate? What's going on? He's an ant. He believes in ant music, and just really being entranced by what I was hearing. The Burundi drumming on this album was like nothing I'd ever heard. Adam Ant's vocals are fantastic, but really in my mind, this album is made by the extraordinary guitar work of Marco Perrone, Man Called Marco. He's a big Roxy Music fan, influenced by the guitar work there, but also really influenced by like unusual sources like Italian spaghetti westerns and so forth. And that mixture of Adam Ant's creativity and his really unusual topics, the sound of the drums and his guitar work make this just an extraordinary album. At number 5, I'll take the B-52's debut album. A lot of people call this album a punk, or even worse, a post-punk album. No, they really were doing something very different here, and their influences are really unique. Really into like Yoko Ono, a lot of avant-garde stuff, surf movies, 60s pop. Just a very unusual set of influences caused this album to be. My older sister introduced me to the B-52s, and in the old days when people would throw a party or they would do a hangout or whatever, it was pretty common to just put on an album and just play it all the way through. And this was one of those albums, if someone had in their collection, you're like, okay, this person is cool. They know about music. Just saw the B-52s again like last year. They still sound great. Another band on this list that is an absolute crime they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Really one of the most adventurous and important bands of rock history. At number 4, I'll take the Police's Zenyatta Mondatta. It's interesting to me because I think the Police, well, they were the biggest band in the world in 1983, huge rock band, and now I just don't hear them talked about as much. And I think a lot of that reason is that new fans who are getting into them are steered towards Synchronicity. That's the album that you should go to, but that's completely wrong. Synchronicity is actually the Police's worst album, and it's just not an easy album to like in a lot of ways. It feels like a band breaking up, and it's too bad because Zenyatta Mondatta is just the Police at their peak, and it holds up really, really well. Stuart Copeland's drumming on this album is extraordinary. I don't think Sting has ever sounded as good as he does on this album. Later, he starts to lose it a little bit, I think, in terms of his vocals, but he sounds great here. They're not afraid to jam. And it's the band at the height of their powers while taking on sort of an existential question, which is, you know, if you're a rock star and you see the world falling apart, like, what's your obligation? What are you supposed to do there? The Police's answer was, of course, when the world is running down, you make the best of what's still around, which is still really good advice. For my third pick, I'm taking Talking Heads' Remain in Light. This was another band that my older sisters tried to get me into and I didn't quite get, but in the fall of '81, they started playing Once in a Lifetime on constant rotation on MTV. And I remember just being transfixed by David Byrne and by the sound of this song and the music video. And it really got me into, I need to go get this album and really try to understand what Talking Heads were all about. There's a lot of history around the making of this album. The band almost broke up at this point because David Byrne wanted to work with Brian Eno more, wanted to go solo. Tina Weymouth and Chris Franz talked to Adrian Belew about maybe him taking over as lead vocalist. And I think it's an album kind of like Rumors, where all that sort of chaos and stuff ended up being like a creative force. It's just an extraordinary album in so many ways and holds up really well and is kind of hypnotic. You listen to it and you feel like you're on this journey. Um, it's tough to pick a favorite Talking Heads album, but for me, this is the one. At pick number 2, I'm taking Tears for Fears, The Hurting. It's funny, I saw Tears for Fears give an interview once where they said the most common thing that people said to them about this album was that it got them through a tough time in college. And I had to laugh because that was exactly my experience with this album. I first listened to this album in college when I was going through a really rough time. I got into a car accident, my health was really poor, I was depressed. I just kind of thought the whole world was like out to get me. And this was the album I used to put on, and it was kind of like an emotional sponge in a lot of ways. Like all my negative energies, all my thoughts went into this album because it was just this beautiful, beautiful album about dark and depressing stuff. If I had to pick the top 10 greatest new wave songs of all time, and maybe I will in a future episode, Mad World would definitely be there. And it just helped me through a tough time. And I think it did so in an incredibly beautiful and uplifting way. For my final pick, I'll take Roxy Music's Avalon. Roxy Music's one of those bands like David Bowie, where I'm sure I'll get some pushback about whether or not they were a new wave band or act, but there's no question this was a new wave album. Roxy Music actually broke up, then reformed to get in on the trend of new wave music that was happening at the end of the 70s, putting out an incredible trinity, Manifesto, Flesh and Blood, and then this one. This is just a gorgeous album that really makes you feel like you are taking some journey to a mythical place like Avalon. Gorgeous soundscapes, and also an added benefit of two things. One is it's extremely nostalgic for me because I got to see them on this tour, and also it's extremely makes me happy now because this is an album that I've enjoyed and love listening to with my wife. So it's just a great album. For my final pick, I'll take Roxy Music's Avalon. Roxy Music's one of those bands like David Bowie, where I'm sure I'll get some pushback about whether or not they were a new wave band or act, but there's no question this was a new wave album. Roxy Music actually broke up, then reformed to get in on the trend of new wave music that was happening at the end of the 70s, putting out an incredible trinity, Manifesto, Flesh and Blood, and then this one. This is just a gorgeous album that really makes you feel like you are taking some journey to a mythical place like Avalon. Gorgeous soundscapes, and also an added benefit of two things. One is it's extremely nostalgic for me because I got to see them on this tour, and also it's extremely makes me happy now because this is an album that I've enjoyed and love listening to with my wife. So it's just a great album. So there's my 10. Let me know in the comments if you love these albums as much as I do, or if there's other ones you love more. I have to say there's at least 10 more albums that it killed me not to put on. So please be gentle in the comments if you're like, where's Blondie? Where's this? The reason is there's just 10 and I had to get rid of some. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Remember, friends, be safe, have fun, and new wave forever.